In this video, I'm going to talk to you about some of the many rules about where to put commas in your writing. I assume that by now probably at least one English teacher has said to you, listen for the pause. And I think that that's really good advice for trying to make educated guesses about where to put commas. But I think the next step is actually knowing the rules. Part of the reason why listen for the pause doesn't always work is that when we speak, we often put pauses in places where commas don't actually belong. So I think that reading and listening for the pause can help you develop a hypothesis about whether a comma might go somewhere, but knowing the rules will help you be certain about whether that is actually a comma appropriate location or a place where you don't really need a comma. Our first rule is a recycled rule, which should make you really happy. The rule is, whenever you have two complete sentences and you want to join them with a FANBOYS, remember that FANBOYS stands for and, nor, but, or, yet, so, you need a comma before the FANBOYS. So the rule is comma plus FANBOYS. I just gave you two examples because hopefully you remember this concept. I really like you, comma, and here's some cake. I really like you, comma, but you can't have any cake. So the rule says that if you want to put and or but or any of the other FANBOYS in between two complete sentences, you need to have a comma there. Now, I'm going to give you some little bit of fine print about the FANBOYS. In English, words like for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so often have multiple jobs. And so often you will encounter these words in sentences and they will not be acting like the kind of FANBOYS that need a comma. I hope you're not feeling your head explode right now because there's one thing you just have to remember. FANBOYS only applies when you have two complete sentences. So take a look at this first example. I like you and your best friend. And you would say, well, there's an and, so I need to put a comma in front of it. But while I like you is a complete sentence, I hope you can see that your best friend is not a complete sentence. So this is not a FANBOYS comma. It's actually a list comma, but we'll talk about that in another video. If you wanted this to be a FANBOYS comma, you would have to turn the second part, the part that comes after the and, into a complete sentence. And you can see that I did that here. I like you, complete sentence, comma, and I like your best friend, complete sentence. So there are two different ways that you could write this sentence, just remembering that in the first way there's no comma because you're just making a list. And if you wanted to make it a FANBOYS comma, you would just need to convert the second item in the list into a complete sentence. Here's another one. For he's a jolly good fellow. This is a for, it's a FANBOYS for, but it is not in between two complete sentences, right? In fact, there's no sentence before here that this for is attached to. This for is not a FANBOYS for, and so obviously you wouldn't put a comma here, right? Last one, you can have cookies or cake. This is that example of two things joined and you get to choose one of them. But I hope that you already see that cake all by itself is not a complete sentence. So there's no comma here. This is again a sort of list of things from which you can choose one. If you wanted to rewrite this so that you were using a comma FANBOYS for your or, you would write you can have cookies, comma, or you can have cake, because this is a complete sentence. So a FANBOYS is only a FANBOYS that needs a comma if it is in between two complete sentences. Here's your next comma rule. This one is really an opportunity to stretch your thinking. We put commas around what we call non-essential information. So if you remember from when we talked about relative clauses, we talked about essential relative clauses, which added information that you need to figure out who the subject of the relative clause is, or non-essential information, which adds nice to know, but not necessary information for you to figure out who or what the subject of the relative clause is. That non-essential concept, though, applies to more than just relative clauses. So I've given you 3 examples of non-essential information that comes at the beginning of a sentence. In the morning, comma, Irwin decided to eat breakfast. So let me show you something about this sentence. This is the thing that I just highlighted. That is your sentence, right? In the morning, it's nice to know, but the sentence doesn't really need it. And the other way to know it's non-essential, I'm hoping you've realized this already, is that since it starts with a preposition, it's a prepositional phrase. And in English, we really like putting prepositional phrases at the beginning of the sentence. At dawn, in the morning. Now my mind's gone blank, but I'm sure that you can think of other examples. And if you're going to begin your sentence with a prepositional phrase, it is non-essential, and you want to slap that comma on after it before you get to the complete sentence. Here's another example. When Irwin was ready to eat, comma, his cat jumped on the table. I'm hoping that you can see that this is another recycled rule, because this non-essential information is a dependent clause. You know it's a dependent clause because inside of it is a complete sentence. Irwin was ready to eat. And before the complete sentence, there's a cliffhanger word. So remember that when you add a cliffhanger word to a complete sentence, you've made it into a dependent clause, and it's considered not essential because this is the essential, important part of the sentence. And you already know that when you begin a sentence with a dependent clause, you put a comma at the end of the dependent clause because it's non-essential. Last one. However, comma, Irwin did not want to share his food. Hopefully, you remember that however is an example of a conjunctive adverb. Remember when we talked about things you can put between complete sentences, one of your options is a conjunctive adverb. And the rule is semicolon, conjunctive adverb, comma. But remember that wherever you put a semicolon, you can put a period. And that means that sometimes you will have sentences that begin with conjunctive adverbs, and you will need to put a comma before you go to the complete sentence. So that's non-essential information at the beginning of the sentence. You can also put it in the middle of the sentence. And in this case, you will notice that the non-essential information basically interrupts the sentence itself. So my sentence is really, Irwin was annoyed when the cat licked the salt shaker. But I could add a non-essential relative clause, remember it begins with who, that, or which, inside my basic sentence. Irwin, comma, who usually loved his cat, comma. So notice that when it's in the middle, it needs a comma on either end. You could also write, Irwin usually loved his cat, but he was annoyed, etc. Or, Irwin usually loved his cat, semicolon, however, comma, he was annoyed. So there are all different ways to write this sentence, and it depends on how you want the sentence to flow. But just remember that if you put non-essential information in the middle, you need comma on either side. Another example, the cat, comma, a long-haired calico, comma, had opinions of her own. You could also write this using a non-essential relative clause. The cat, who was a long-haired calico, had opinions, etc. Right? Either way, whether you want to use a relative clause or just a little phrase in here, you need a comma on either side. Finally, you could take that however from the beginning of the sentence and you could stick it in the middle. And this is if you're looking for a certain kind of rhythm. Irwin, however, pushed the cat off the table, in which case you need a comma on either side. Sorry, I didn't highlight that. Now it's in there. Finally, there is no finally. There is one more rule. I will tell you about it in class. Stay tuned. I just want to point out, though, one more way of thinking about this non-essential information. Notice that if you take your sentence, wherever the non-essential information is touching the sentence, it needs a comma, right? So this non-essential information is touching the sentence right here, comma. Touching the sentence right here, comma. Touching the sentence right here, comma. When it's in the middle, it's touching the sentence on both sides. Touching the sentence, comma on either side. Touching the sentence, same here, touching the sentence. I hope this is helpful. In class, we'll talk about how to deal with non-essential information at the end of the sentence, and I'll give you a clue. It needs a comma where it touches the sentence. Good luck on the quiz and bring any questions to class.